Hello, today we will talk about the application of fossils. In the lectures which is foregoing, we are continuously talking about different aspects of the fossils, how the fossils form, what are different modes of fossilizations. But in this lecture, we will be discussing about the application of fossils. The information given by the fossils is not only significant for the determination of the age of the rock, but also the idea concerning the paleobiology is also very useful. The taxa used for the paleoecological interpretation should essentially be benthic in order to get the most probable ecology. That means the form which doesn't move at all, that remains at its place, is the best witness of the change in that situation and in that realm. As an example, you can take if you go to a village and meet the oldest person in that village and who has not moved anywhere from that area. So, that oldest person in that village will tell you the significant changes since many times in that area. No other person younger than that man will be able to tell everything that happened in that area. In a similar way, the fossils which are benthic means they remain at their place, they don't move. So, they have seen or they have witnessed different changes in that climate or the ambience in that area. The earth is a dynamic planet wherein every piece of crust is under a constant movement and has remained so since Archean. And in universe you can see everything is moving. In your body you may see that you are static, but the air is moving inside you. The blood is flowing from the tip of the toe to the head. And even if you consider an atom, the electrons are moving. Consider the earth, that earth is moving on its axis. The earth is moving around the sun. So, in this system, everything seems static, but everything is under a constant movement. That is a very, wonderful part of our observation. Applying the principle of uniformity, this movement of the crust has changed the paleogeography dramatically on the geological time scale. The study of paleogeography is therefore extremely fascinating. Now, we will talk about the paleoautoecology. What is autoecology? Autoecology is the ecology where we concern the interaction of an individual with its environment. We don't consider the other organism into consideration. So, it is the organism specific interaction with the environment, that is what we call as autoecology. So, we will be discussing the paleoautoecology. This is one very significant application of the fossils also. The paleoautoecology of an extinct organism may be taken broadly to equate its mode of life, as I told you. Of course, there are aspects of fossil paleoautoecologies for which there is very little hope of being able to reconstruct. For example, it is difficult to imagine that anything will ever be known of mating dances in extinct flies, but a remarkable amount can be gleaned. Arguments made from homology with living relatives and analogy from organisms with apparently similar adaptations from trace fossils or from models of fossils can be used. It is almost invariably preferable to use a combination of approaches in order to allow cross-referencing. When fossil organisms belong to taxonomic groups that still have extant representatives, much can be learned by applying knowledge about living taxa using principles of homology. Clearly, this is likely to be the most successful in groups which are most closely related, and this relationship is stretched. Any conclusions that extant and fossil groups may have lived in the same way are of tenuous. Interpretation of the modes of life of most fossil bivalves, mollusca, is relatively straightforward. Several features of bivalves make these organisms ideal for paleoecologic reconstruction. First, modern bivalves are more diverse both in terms of taxonomic units and in life habits than ever before in their 500 million years evolutionary history, meaning that interpretations can be based on a wider range of possible models. Second, a wide variety of, for example, oysters, scallops, mussels, and clams is of great commercial interest, and consequently, their biologies have been studied intensively. Third, it is well demonstrated that bivalve shell morphology and life habit are intimately related. Several aspects of its morphology can be used to interpret the paleoecology of this animal based on the comparison with the living bivalve of the same family. The oldest part of the shell, close to the umbo, is a regular scallop shape and shows the morphological features associated with the attachment to a hard substrate by byssal threads or by foot. The surrounding section, later growth of the shell, is highly irregular and its form uh, varies from individual to individual because at this size the bivalve began to cement to the seafloor and modified its shape to suit the substrate. Experimental evidences has shown that cementation in bivalves is a good defense against predators. Clearly, some caution is required in using modern organisms to interpret the paleoecology of the extinct fossils, even when they are closely related. Some organisms have undergone a major shift in aspects of their life habits over the evolutionary history. For example, monoplacophorans, a primitive cap-like molluscan class, are known from a variety of shallow marine sediments from the lower Paleozoic, apparently living in communities alongside brachiopods and trilobites. They then apparently disappear from the fossil record during the Devonian and were presumed from the extinct until the celebrated rediscovery of the neoplana during the dredging of the deep water more than 3,500 meters off the coast of the Mexico during the Danish-led Galathea expedition in 1952. However, it would be clearly be inappropriate to reconstruct the paleoecology of the Paleozoic forms based entirely on our understanding of the biology of neoplana. Presumably during the Upper Paleozoic, the monoplacophores were forced perhaps by the competition or predation pressure into the deep water refuges that are not represented into the sedimentary record. Other Paleozoic taxa that was important and widespread in shelf communities such as Brachiopoda and stalked crinoids are postulated by some people also to have been driven into the refugia. These examples clearly demonstrate the need to use several lines of evidences when reconstructing paleoecology and most importantly, not to divorce the study of fossils from their lithological context. What happens when there are no convenient living homologues? In such cases, the paleoecologist must use more imaginative approaches. Trilobites became extinct by the close of the Paleozoic, although much may be gleaned of their paleobiology by homology and by analogy with the other arthropod groups, such as understanding their molting and likely internal anatomy. It is believed that trilobites exploited a wide range of the life habits, although most were benthic. Others were pelagic or nectonic. Some, for example, calamine, are interpreted as having been voracious predators, whereas others were thought to have been filter feeders or deposit feeders. The lines of evidence used to elucidate these different paleoecological details are varied. Much is reliant on detailed studies of functional morphology, but evidence from trace fossils, including some that show evidence of trilobites tracking worms and experimental modeling, have also played a role. An interesting example is the interpretation of the lower Paleozoic olinalids as possible chemosymbionts in an elegant study by Richard Forty. using a combination of evidence based on the functional morphology of the family, principally the large number and wide nature of the thoracic segments and degenerate hypostome, the lithological evidence that olinellids tended to inhabit sulfur-rich, unbioturbated black shales, and by analogy with totally unrelated modern chemosymbiotic organisms such as leucinid bivalves. Forty suggested that these trilobites might well have harbored sulfate reducing bacteria on their gills, which allowed them to live in difficult oxygen poor environments when living relatives and even good analogues are absent. More unconventional approaches can be taken in the study of the fossil mode of life. Graptoloids were a significant group of macrozooplankton living in the Ordovician to mid-Devonian open seas. They have very remote living relatives, the pterobranchs, but their benthic encrusting mode of life makes direct comparison unrealistic. Instead, work has concentrated on the response of the graptoloid shapes to seawater, which had the same properties in the lower Paleozoic as it does now. Physical and computer derived models show that both the overall colony shape and the detailed morphology would have had important consequences for the behavior of the species in water. Colonies were designed to rotate during the movement, thereby increasing the volume of the water that could be sampled. Flow of water was redirected into the thecal aperture where the zooids lived by an arrangement of spines, hoods, or hooks in many species. A standard orientation related to the dominant direction of water flow was maintained by structures such as Virgula or Virgula arrayed at the proximal and the distal ends of the colony. Understanding the physical effects of adaptations shown by fossils allows inferences about the life habits to be made. For example, concerning the likely feeding position of the zooids and the sampling requirements that conditioned their fitness and hence the evolution. Then comes the paleosynecology. Till then, we have discussed the paleoautoecology, that means concerning the relationship of the organism with its individual. Now, we will be considering the paleosynecology. What is paleosynecology? To understand paleosynecology, let us first understand the synecology. Synecology is the interaction of a group of the individuals with their environments or ambience. So, this is how it is different from the autoecology. Paleosynecology is the fossil studies of the same traits. Ecologists define a community as a recurring group of taxa in fixed proportions that live together in a particular habitat. The focus of the interest is on the way in which populations of the single species or of different taxa interact and the manner in which resources with that habitat are shared between the different groups. Ecological studies can be well founded on the quantitative analysis based on the direct observation. Paleoecologists, however, are faced with the number of problems and must use direct methods. First, a high proportion of any community may be soft-bodied or weakly skeletonized, such that they are unlikely to be preserved in the fossil record. It is estimated that more than 70% of the modern taxa fall into this category, and by the Middle Cambrian, Burgess Shale provides a salutary lesson, showing a wealth of poorly or unskeletonized organisms such as worms and arthropods, not usually preserved in contemporary deposits. Second, relatively few organisms are preserved in life position, and many may have been transported far from their original habitats. Like, for example, if a cat dies and it gets into the river, that river transports that cat into the ocean, that will not mean the cat was living into the ocean. So, the occurrence of a fossil into a rock doesn't prove its authenticity. As a result, the paleoecologist must consider whether the group of the fossils being studied is autochthonous or not. Autochthonous means that is preserved in its life position. Para-autochthonous is another term, that is, the elements are disturbed and disarticulated, but the fossils are not necessarily far removed from their origins. Then comes the allochthonous. Allochthonous means that the organism from different habitats have been swept together before drawing any conclusion. Third, even if a group of fossils is considered autochthonous, it has to be recognized that any bed or even bedding plane assemblage is going to be the time averaged, and it will thus contain a sample of the individuals that lived on that site over many centuries or even thousands of years. In this way, individuals of the same species but of very different generations may be found next to one another, or taxa that lived in successive communities on that site may appear to have coexisted. As a result of these complications, paleoecologists prefer to use the term assemblage rather than community. In addition, the soft-bodied components of the original communities are seldom found fossilized. If similar assemblages are found to occur widely, either geographically or temporally, this provides a good indication that they are a real ecological phenomena, and these are given the name associations. Then let us talk about the interaction between organisms. Organisms may interact in a number of different ways. Most important among these are the competition for resources. For example, for nutrients, for space, for light, or the reproduction or mates, either intra or interspecifically predator-prey interactions and symbiosis, which runs through a spectrum from being beneficial to both partners, that is the commensalism, to parasitism, in which one partner's advantage is deleterious to the other. Ecologists have found that these interactions play an important role in controlling the fitness of the modern organisms, and competition and predation in particular are thought to be extremely important in driving forces in evolution. At first sight, it seems that the fossil record is likely to be virtually mute on the interactions between organisms. However, this is not the case. Clearly, individual cases must be carefully assessed, but it is possible to generate quantitative data on interactions between organisms from the fossil record. Then comes competition. The competition exclusion principle suggests that two species that have exactly the same requirement cannot exist together within an habitat. This is quite real. Where two species do not appear to have the same requirements, one will prevent it from the maintaining a viable population by the success of the other, or will be forced to adapt in order to use slightly different resources. The latter strategy may involve character displacement. For example, modification of filter feeding apparatus to cope with particles of a different size. Competition has often been invoked as a cause of macroevolutionary change, although it is difficult to demonstrate. For example, some have suggested that the post-Paleozoic decline in articulated brachiopods was at least in part influenced by the superior competitive advantages of the bivalves that may occupy the same niche, and a similar argument has been made to link the success of dinosaurs with the decline of synapsids towards the end of the Triassic. One situation in which it has been possible to collect high quality data concerns the interaction between borers and skeletonized incrusters, for example, bryozoas, oyster-like bivalves, and serpulid worms. These organisms have the advantage of having been preserved in situ, and thus the fossils maintain their spatial relation to one another and to the substratum. It must be remembered that soft-bodied incrusters, for example, anemones, sponges that may also have coexisted, will be unrepresented, although evidences of their existence may be revealed by bioimmuration, that is, preservation by the overgrowth of skeletonized organisms. In these cases, it is also possible to examine competitive overgrowth. It is known that space on hard substrate is at a premium in modern marine habitats, from which it may be inferred that taxa that are able rapidly to colonize space will be at an advantage over those that do not do so less aggressively. Much of this type of the research has been centered on two clades of extant bryozoans, the cyclostomes and the chelostomes. Both evolved independently from soft bodies tenostome ancestors. The cyclostomes in the Ordovician time and the chelostomes in the Cretaceous. The chelostomes replaced the cyclostomes as the dominant bryozoan clade, and it has been argued that the former were more successful as competitors in my way. An analysis of the competitive overgrowth between the two groups from a range of the localities, that is Cretaceous to recent, by McKinney. It has revealed that the chelostomes consistently won around 66% of all interaction between the two clades, although interestingly, this figure appears to have remained constant over geological time. The next aspect to be considered is predation. All organisms die, and a great many deaths are the result of being eaten by the predators. It becomes the part of the food chain. The need to avoid predation is a very important selection pressure. Hence, the battery of defensive morphologies, for example, spines and thick shells, behaviors such as leaping by cockles of swimming, scallops, and life habits such as deep burrowing that may be demonstrated in modern organisms. Very rarely, predators may be fossilized in the act of predation, with prey remains preserved in their guts. For example, but predator prey interactions may be interpreted from the fossil record in a number of other ways, such as paleoecologists are not limited to the exceptional preservation to chart the evolution of different predatory groups and methods. Various aspects of an organism's functional morphology, such as possession of teeth or claws, may suggest that it was a predator. For example, the large toothed chelicerae of the Paleozoic Eurypterids, that is, the large aquatic scorpions, have been used to suggest that they may have been powerful predators of the earlier fish. Most theropod dinosaurs, including the well-known Tyrannosaurus rex or T-Rex, have narrow, sharp, pointed, curved teeth, mainly with the serrated edges, which suggests that they were carnivorous. The most useful evidence, however, has come from the study of the prey remains, although some predatory groups eat their prey without leaving any evidence of damage. For example, starfish that prize apart bivalve shells or fish that simply swallow their prey whole. There are two important and widely used predatory methods on the shelled prey, crushing and drilling, that can be recognized in the fossil record. A whole variety of an arthropod and vertebrate predatory groups feed by crushing open the shells of the victims, many of them leaves very diagnostic breakage pattern. Similarly, a number of worms, gastropoda and octopoda, drill neat holes into their victim's shell for either the extraction of the tissues or the injection of toxins. Where such damage is evident, it is possible to undertake the quantitative survey of the frequency of attack by a particular predatory groups and the frequency of the prey repair, which provides a measure of the effectiveness of their defenses, and also some aspects of the behavior such as prey preference or stereotypic predictable and so diagnostic of the predator. Attack strategy. There is now a strong body of defense to suggest that the levels of predation pressure have increased during the Phanerozoic. In particular, it is evident that there have been marked increase in the past 270 million years, especially during the Cretaceous and early Tertiary, during which time the number of predator taxa increased and more specialized feeding techniques evolved. This is a part of the so-called Mesozoic marine revolution, a major reconstructing or restructuring of the marine communities following the Permian-Triassic extinction and leading to the ecosystem taking on their modern aspects. It can be argued that the increase in the predation pressure had a profound effect on the evolution of the individual taxa and changed the ecological properties of the communities. It has been effectively shown that post-Paleozoic gastropods have become the better armor, that is thickening their shells, more taxa with slit-like aperture and fewer taxa with loose coiling, and therefore better able to resist crushing predators. Such as crabs, many bivalve taxa adopted new life habits such as cementation and deep burrowing, which can be shown to have decreased the threat from predators, and stalked crinoids moved away from shallow water communities into deeper habitats where there would have been the fewer predators. In this particular lecture, we have discussed the aspects which can be taken or interpreted from the fossils, and they become more effective when compared with the modern counterparts. We'll keep on discussing the other related aspects in the lectures to come. Till then, thank you very much.